Where is my camera? Click on it.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, but what happened?
Now go to where, no, that's not right.
What
You don't
is
have
my-
audio either.
Yeah,
Try,
I do have audio. I just found here I have to hook up.
I'll start video.
Last time and it didn't work.
Okay, stop for a second. I don't know what happened.
Me either. This is the same thing that happened last time.
Go down to your set.
Hmm?
Go to settings. Where are your settings?
I see my volume is there.
Settings.
Where is settings? Where do we need to go back to Zoom? Chat, start video. Let me see if I.
Select a camera.
Should I click on one of them?
Yeah.
Hmm?
Yeah.
First one?
Didn't work. Try this view.
Speaker view?
Nope. Because we're talking, it's coming up with you speaking. You don't have us muted.
Full screen. I don't understand what's going on. I want gallery view. Can you get it on there?
We'll find out in a minute.
Can you hear me, Anne-Marie? I can't hear you. You're muted. We're working on the, I don't know why the camera's not working.
It is working.
Can you see me?
No, I see someone, and it must be your wife.
Yeah, she's on the other one.
No, I'm not out to look. Why is the camera not on you? Here you go.
See, that's the iPad.
Yeah, I
I'm on
just
the
saw
computer
you.
and the computer's not working.
Well,
I'm going to, should I go out and come in on this?
Yes.
I'm going to,
Now we're echoing because, yeah, get out of there. Get out of there, Dennis.
I'm leaving. All right. Camera, it's on, but it's not working.
All right, so
Get out of here. Can I move this over just a little bit so I can use this? Okay, now you can come back. And the exact same thing that happened last time, Alice.
all right, let's just
Let's close this and put it right on here.
okay. There you go. There's your head right there. For some reason, you need to sit up higher. And
Put this on mute.
can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you. Oh, there we go. We can hear you now too. Okay, I think we're in.
Good. I think
Thank you.
we have everybody we're going to have, because Jeremy told me that he couldn't attend this meeting.
Okay.
So we've got everybody but Jeremy, and we also have Charlie and Janine on. So let's call the meeting to order. And I've got one announcement that might be of interest.
Well,
I talked to the chief. I don't think he's on. And I also talked with him in writing and by email, I mean, orally and by email, on a couple of points. And it had been suggested that we think about yield signs instead of stop signs at the end of the state-named streets as they hit Cedar. And the chief is not a fan of yield signs. even though the stop sign, despite the stop sign at each intersection and that the speed limit on Bay is 10. But so I think unless somebody else has a different view, we'll drop that idea.
I can tell you this, that we brought that idea up at the meeting 2 years ago, and there was a great deal of resistance from the residents on the beach because of the use of Bay Avenue for children on bicycles and walking and things of that nature. So I think it's a good idea not to go there.
It's the same thing that the chief mentioned. I think, Kevin, you had the same concern too in regard to how far before a stop sign cars should park. But on that point, I checked with the chief, who had said that he would accept the council's discretion on whether to enforce the 30-foot limit from stop signs on the state named streets. And he said that's correct, he would. But he believes we could mark areas on the pavement of certain streets that are problematic, like what they did on Cedar, to improve sight lines and turning radius. Then he clarified a question I had about the whether the distance from a stop sign required by state code of 30 feet applies on both sides of the street or only on the street where the stop sign is, on the side where the stop sign is. In other words, if you're turning right onto Connecticut, does the 30 feet apply on your right or only on your left? And he said only on your left. Then I asked him about the fire hydrants, because there are several. And he said that the 15-foot distance required from a fire hydrant, he thought about this, and he initially said it's as the crow flies. So if the fire hydrant is set back, it doesn't need to be 15 feet along the street. But he thought again and decided that the purpose of the 15 feet was to give the the fire department a chance to hook up to the hydrant. And they need that 15 feet on each side of the hydrant. So that's another point we need to keep in mind. Any announcements from anybody else? Okay, let's go to the minutes. I've given a couple of clerical corrections to Janine. Janine, thank you for all 3 sets of minutes for the 3 out of 4 previous meetings now. So we reviewed October 5th last time, and now we've got October 22nd, November 5th, and November 24th in front of us. I sent Janine a couple of clerical corrections to the first 2. And on the November 24th minutes, the only thing I think I see is that Jennifer Daisy needs an E in her last name. Janine, if you would make that correction. Does anybody else have any corrections? Janine, I think the minutes are extremely useful for recording the description of what we said about the different streets. Thank you for them, and please convey our thanks to Jackie for her work on the earlier minutes. Then, just as last time, we pointed out that the chat comments aren't part of the minutes, but we've asked for them so that we could review them from the previous meeting. And I've done that, and I thank the people who took part in the chat on the previous meeting for their comments, all of which we take into account as we continue our review. Any other observations on this? Then may I have a motion to approve the minutes of October 22nd, November 5th, and November 24th, subject to the clerical corrections?
So moved.
Thanks, Dennis. And who seconded?
Kevin.
Thank you, Kevin. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Then did each of you get the, well, the next thing is, if you've all received the workbook that incorporates the comments as I got them on the different streets that we entered from last time's discussion. Were there any comments on the revised field study spread? Hearing none, then let's tackle a thing, something that a couple of you suggested, and thank you for it. It's a plan on how we're going to and let's see, I copied out the wrong version. Let me get to it on screen. Here we go. Now I've got it. I'll print it out, but I've got it on screen. So let's talk about this. I put some thought into it, but it's by no means set in stone. And I'd love to hear what people think our priorities ought to be.
Dennis, I'll jump. Rob, I'll jump in and to get started. And again, thank you for doing this. It was a very helpful exercise, at least for me, and I think it highlighted some issues I'm hoping we can address today. To me, the overwhelming majority of our committee meetings have been spent reviewing the survey. In the proposed agenda that you shared, another 3 of our meetings of the 13 will be spent doing the same. And there's an additional meeting, it's meeting number 9, where we're going to determine which obstructions in the city right-of-ways should be removed and when. That means that the 13 meetings, 8 of those will have been dedicated almost exclusively to this right-of-way issue for only one area of Lewis Beach. At the same time, since we began this committee, we've learned some additional facts, or some additional facts known to others have been shared with the entire group. First, the city council voted unanimously back in 2018 and shared with property owners that the city was focusing on addressing future placement of obstacles in city right-of-ways, future placement, and street shoulders that prevent parking. Second, the city staff was directed that when building permits were issued, the city would inform the building owners that no new obstructions to right-of-ways would be permitted, and where they already existed, the city would determine, if practical, how and when to remove them. And third, the city staff was charged with reviewing any existing impediments, they called them impediments, to determine if practical to remove them as well. That was 2.5 years ago. It's still a little uncertain exactly what happened, but that was the charge. Today, we find ourselves engaged in an exercise that appears to be designed to revisit the same issue. Although we do not have any guidance about the applicability of the city's existing policy, nor what has happened in the interim, nor in large part the overall purpose of what we're doing. I'm a little concerned under the proposed agenda, we may not well have sufficient time to address all of the other issues that are in our charge, all of the other issues that could impact parking, especially in the same sort of deliberation we've given this particular issue. More importantly, I think while our ad hoc committee may decide that one of its recommendations is the city may address the city's existing right-of-way policy on Lewis Beach, the committee should not be expected to make recommendations about specific impediments that need to be removed. That is the work of the city, its staff, and its council, quite frankly, as the city has already indicated. Therefore, I'd like to propose today, Dennis, a motion that we stop the current use of our limited meeting time to review our notes on the city survey, that we share the information we have gathered with the city for their work in the future, and use the remaining meeting times, and including the additional 3 meetings, to develop, not only clarify our goals, but develop recommendations that address the issues identified by the council, so that we can make sure we address as best as possible all the issues that could impact public parking on all of Lewis Beach.
Thank you, Kevin.
Is that a motion, Kevin?
Sir, yes,
I'll second that motion.
thank you.
Could you restate the motion, Kevin?
Sure, and through the miracles of modern technology, if you give me 30 minutes, no, I'm just kidding, but if you want, I can send it to the committee as well, if that would help, through a cut and paste effort, but I'll say it, read it again. I propose that we stop the current use of our limited meeting time to review our notes on the city survey, that we share the information we have gathered with the city, and use the remaining meeting times to clarify our goals for the committee and to develop recommendations that address the issues identified by the council, so that we can have time and make sure, as best as possible, we address all issues that could impact public parking on all of Lewis Beach.
And I think you seconded that, Dennis.
I did.
Janine, did you get that down?
So since he has it in writing, I was going to ask that he send it to Janine, and if you don't have Janine's email address, if you send it to me, I'll get it to her. That way it gets in the minutes.
Sure. Tell you what, could I just flip around one of Rob's most recent emails? Would that work? Yep, you're on it.
Probably.
Sorry, I was muted. I said yes.
Okay.
I'd like to, it's now we've seconded it, so discussion?
Well, let's see what Kevin can do about flipping it around yet, because I didn't frankly catch all the parts of it. Kevin, if you wouldn't even mind saying it again slowly, that would be great.
God willing, you'll have it in a nanosecond. As a matter of fact, judging on reactions on some faces, would appear they already have.
Here we go. I've got a, okay.
Did you get it, Anne Marie? Thumbs up. Great. Linda, did you get it?
I got it, yes.
Thank you.
Now, yeah, Dennis, I think discussion would be good.
Okay, and I agree with Kevin, and to reinforce that, nothing on this area of the beach. I mean, the whole beach goes from Cape Henlopen State Park to the inlet. But in this area of the beach between Savannah Road and the inlet, there's very little that is uniform. And as we have discovered in doing the surveys, the right-of-way on a particular connector street could be less at one end of the street than it is the other. The pavements are not in the middle of the right-of-way. On several of the streets, there's less than 10 feet right-of-way on one side. And it just makes it so difficult. And many of the things that are in the right-of-way that prevent people from parking within the 10 feet of the paved surface have been there for eons. As Kevin read the policy, in the last couple of years when there's been a lease extension or a new building permit issued, it has been addressed in those items. And I think that given the survey that Charlie's group has done, the city has all the information that they need to review each of these streets and make a fair, practical decision on where to and where not to remove the things that are within the 10 feet to prevent people from parking. So I think it's just something that we really should do, and it would give us a lot more time to address the other issues in our charge.
the issues such as those that we have listed on the proposed plan?
Well, we can talk about them. Some of them have already been addressed, but yes, we can go through them. But I think that it would be a much more efficient use of our time than to continue these surveys.
Okay. Anybody else?
Yes, Rob, it's Khalil. I'm inclined to support this, and let me explain why. As I've mentioned from the beginning, I've been fairly uncomfortable rendering judgment. It's clear we can all review the streets. Charlie and his team have done that already. But the feedback I've received from Lewis Beach residents, it's been overwhelming, frankly. They're concerned that the city potentially is going to take part of their property away from them, but not touch another piece of property. And I've mentioned this to you previously, using the words arbitrary and capricious in how this may get applied. And I have been uncomfortable from the beginning, judging, not having the engineering background and others that a Charlie O'Donnell and others have, reviewing all this. It's not hard to review what's technically within the encroachment, but what's going to get reclaimed and what's not going to get reclaimed it scares me, because I don't want to be the one who potentially is defendant in a lawsuit, because I've heard many people talking about legal action if the city decides to, particularly if the city decides to randomly and selectively reclaim certain right-of-ways. And so I do have a problem with this, notwithstanding the fact that I appreciate what Tim just delivered today, which I went through and looked. I thought it was terrific, and there's a lot of good information here. But I would like to debate more on what potential solutions there could be, and discuss that as a committee and as a community. And because I think it's going to take some time to deliver by February 1st recommendations that are thought out and comprehensive, that we can submit to the council for further consideration. So that's kind of where I've been for a while. And again, I am likely to support what Kevin has proposed.
Well, let me address a few of the concerns that have been raised, and they're natural and they're not new.
Right.
Rob, do you want to first ask Linda to comment?
Yeah. Thank you, Tim. I happen to agree, and in fact, Rob, I think I even brought it up to you one time about how tough were we going to be as far as the encroachments. Is it going to be right across the board? We were going to reclaim the territory, or was it going to be a case of maybe doing one section that wasn't going to create a hardship for the owner, and then letting something else go? So I do agree with Khalil as far as what he's had to say, and I think we are spending a lot of time going over each individual streets. And I do have copies of the GMB report with all the hardscaping, mailboxes, everything they put out back in, I guess it was 2018. And it seems like what we're finding is pretty much the same thing we had from a couple years ago.
Tim?
Thank you. I actually am not going to agree with my esteemed colleagues on this committee who have spoken so far. I'd like to remind everyone that when Dennis and the former committee worked on this issue several years ago, they did so without the benefit of a land surveyor having staked the right of way. They were trying to interpret the right of way. examine the facts and determine what the facts are. That is in fact what our exercise is about this year, I believe. It's about using the fact that the city has incurred the expense of staking the right-of-way and now make a clear, I'll call it inventory of what obstructions exist in the right-of-way. We're not making any other kind of value evaluation or assessment. We're just simply doing an inventory at this point in time. I also, to the point that Dennis spoke to about the lack of uniformity in the city design or the street design of Lewis Beach, that is part of the beauty of this part of Lewis Beach. The fact that it is not like a tract subdivision. There is a lack of conformity, if you will, but yet there is a system in place. There are right-of-ways, there are, of determined widths. And we now know what the widths are, and by the fact that they've been surveyed by a land surveying crew. So I think that the way I've approached this is I am not expecting myself nor the committee to cross the statement about what is going to be done opposite way. So therefore, our recommendations that we would make to City Council
the encroachment into the right-of-way where it prevented parking. What we did address, talk about the issue of when it was intentional as opposed to when it has been historic and been there for a long time. And because we didn't have the survey, that's why we requested it, so that whenever it was addressed, it would be factual, as you just said.
right.
And now that we have all those facts, and the city has them, thanks to trouble, and now the city can implement their policy that they adopted in April of 2018, and where practical, take back the encroachments. Where it's not, leave things as they are. So that's my comment on that, because I was a big part of that, and we labored over this issue.
The reason I made that one observation is if you look at the plan Rob has shared, meeting number 8, decide criteria for recommending when to remove an obstruction. Okay, to me, that sounds like policy. Like we're coming up with a policy. It could be, for example, the city's current policy, I would argue, is prospective. Primarily when the property owner decides they want to rebuild, or if the city makes some other observation, but that is an implementation issue. But meeting number 9 is apply criteria to identified obstructions. Now that's where we kind of go past a policy decision and we get into specific, that mailbox has to go, that tree has to be cut down, that this sort of things. That's what I don't think this committee should be engaged in. I think one thing I've learned during this exercise has been we often don't know specific facts about specific properties. We don't know all of the reasons why no parking signs were placed where they were. We didn't know, I think, until one of our discussions, I'm sorry, Dennis, I think you knew this in advance, but the rest of us didn't know, that the property of the homeowner right across the Bay Avenue from you, his property goes to a quarter way into the street. And I just am a little, I just don't think it is a smart move on our part as a committee to engage in the sort of specific obstruction, what is the word? Obstruction by obstruction analysis that has been proposed here. To me, that's implementing a policy, not having a policy discussion. I don't think this committee is equipped, and I would be very hesitant about making, even if, although we're an ad hoc committee, making a recommendation that has the patina of the city council behind it with regard to an individual property owner's actions. I don't think we're equipped to do that.
Anyone? Well, let me address a couple of the points. Kevin, I gather, just to pick up on your last point, that you think what we ought to be doing is the policy part, leaving the implementation part to staff. Is that fair?
Yes, Dennis, and I think in part that was framed by the city council's opinion that was shared back in 2018. That seemed to be the way they were approaching it.
Okay, and the as to the 2018 policy, that was an outgrowth, I think, of not an outgrowth, but it followed on the committee that Dennis co-chaired, and that was in 2018. But yet, in 2019, this additional, or in 2020, this additional committee was created, and it expressly said the work was incomplete. So it's not as though the policy that resulted in 2018 is the council's last word. Is that fair?
Yes, and Rob, I want to apologize if I've been misstating your name. I would think I'll from now on go with Mr. Morgan and stop confusing with others. I'm very embarrassed. Apology. My dog is now looking at me very disgusted. No, I understand, Rob. And are you suggesting that the city council position, as it was stated in 2018, is that no longer the operative policy?
No, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm suggesting that the council obviously thinks there's more to be learned and done.
I totally agree, but I don't think it is necessarily limited to right-of-ways. I think there are other issues that are impacting this whole discussion in this whole area and this that have not yet been addressed that should be.
One or two. Then let me talk about a couple of other things. Khalil, the concern you've got, as I hear it, is that this committee will make recommendations to the council basically on a subjective ad hoc basis. And so, and you've heard that from lots of property owners who think the city's going to take their property away.
Correct.
I mean, quite apart from the fact of the question of whose property, the point I think that I've been insistent on from the start is that we avoid that we not do that we examine, we learn all we can, and then we formulate a rule, an objective set of criteria that we can say, here's how they ought to be applied. Such as, if a driveway's in existence and it predated the ordinance saying driveways are limited to 20 feet, we can leave it alone. If a tree is old and not in the line of sight, we can leave it alone. If there's a a landscaping that goes into the right of way, but removing it wouldn't create another parking space. We leave it alone. That sort of thing. And if we reached that, which I gather Kevin is not opposed to, coming up with a set of decision criteria, then we have an objective basis. If we were just to send the city staff out to say, hey, tell us what obstructions should be removed, or just go remove them, then that would generate a whole lot of probably very justified concerns that that their judgments were subjective and they were applying them with kind of hit or miss. So that's my concern. I thoroughly agree with you that we don't want to do anything in a one-off way to favor one person or to favor one kind of obstruction. We want to approach this as objectively as we can. For me, at least, in approaching that set of decision criteria, it has been very useful and probably will continue to be useful to look at what's there on the ground. So you understand what kind of things are impeding lines of sight, parking spaces are not, where a trash container can be moved back or not. And without those bits of enlightenment, it's harder for me to contribute to the formulation of a set of uniform criteria. Dennis's point that the right-of-way varies is perfectly true. His point that the long-standing nature of some of the obstructions is perfectly true. I don't see how that affects what we're trying to do because thanks to Charlie, we have the rights of way determined. And so there was one street that I was just looking at the other day where there's an obstruction, I think it's stone landscaping, that goes 18 inches into the right of way. But the street is really, there's very little right of way on that side of the street. So telling him to take down his landscaping, it wouldn't improve, it wouldn't create a parking space. It wouldn't enable a shoulder to be created. So my inclination would be in the rule to say, in that kind of situation, leave it alone. Let me just check my notes again. I would be very reluctant to throw the city staff into the role of doing anything without clear guidelines. At the same time, we've clearly got a majority on the committee that wants to stop the inventory. Well, we're more than halfway through. And the suggestion in the motion is we turn this information over to the city council. I might not myself stop looking at the streets because the more I learn, the better. But that, I think, if that's what the committee wants to do, that's fine. And maybe we can reduce the number of meetings we have, which seem maybe a concern of yours, Kevin.
No, Rob, that's not my concern.
Okay. It's just the use to which we're putting the meetings.
Well, no, that is not alone, but I don't think, for example, we understand what's happened. I haven't, maybe I am the only one. I don't know what's happened in the last 2.5 years. When people have built new properties in the last 2.5 years, was this new policy implemented? Was it enforced? How was it addressed? I don't know. It may have well been. There seems to have been some property construction near me that it wasn't, but it may well have been. Has the city undertaken anything with regard to that policy back in 2018, now that it's armed with the right-of-way itself? Has the city engaged in that case-by-case explanation that the city council directed it to do with regard to the existing impediments and structures? We're using so many terms, obstructions and impediments, in the rights of ways. Has that happened? Has that been undergone? I don't know. But I still think that if we're talking about a policy, that's one thing. If we're talking then about how the city should implement that policy on a case-by-case basis, on an impediment-by-impediment basis, shouldn't be the function of the committee, because quite frankly, we won't have time, even with all the meetings you scheduled, to finish that.
Does your concern, it seems to me that as I hear it, there are two concerns there. One is that we're spending too much time identifying obstructions and describing them. And the other is that in meeting number 9, I have this item, apply the criteria. And I gather your larger concern is with this committee trying to apply the criteria. Is that fair?
That's part of it, yes.
Okay. Well, let me.
But I also, Rob, I also think we have spent all of the meetings to date, another 3 meetings, including this one, on this issue. We have not had a single meeting or a single discussion on permit parking or the ideas behind permit parking. That's part of our charge. There are other things that are listed in that charge we've not addressed. We have other related questions we haven't addressed. And I'm a little concerned that if we continue along this approach, all we will have done is maybe or maybe not come up with some recommendations with regard to a right of way, but that's it. And I think that that's not going to successfully discharge the instructions we were given by the council with regard to this committee. That's my concern.
Well, let me look at the motion again and just make sure I've got it. Here we go. Propose you stop the current use of our limited meeting time to review our notes on the city's survey, share the information we have gathered with the city, use remaining meeting times to clarify our goals, and develop recommendations that address the issues identified so that we can address as best as possible all issues that could impact public parking on all of Lewis Beach. I don't see in that a concern that the information we've gathered is not useful. So, and in fact, by suggesting we share it with the city, you're almost suggesting it is. So let's, we can, as a matter of form, pass the motion, which I think is 4 people have spoken in favor of it out of a total of 7 on the committee and 6 here. So let's proceed on the basis of the motion. Tim, do you wish to make the motion a matter of record? Well, it is a matter of record. It's in the minutes. So why don't we call for, is there any further discussion of it? I propose to call the question. Hearing none?
None.
Then, was there some, I wasn't looking at the screen. I was looking at the email. If somebody had raised his hand, I would have missed it. So, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. So now that's what we're doing. And thanks to the committee for their collective wisdom and in guiding us in the direction of the motion. Now, I think if we go back to the plan, would the committee agree that considering this plan is part of complying with the motion?
I'm not quite sure what you said, Rob.
Okay. You've got in front of you a meeting plan for 2020.
Yes.
Obviously, the suggestion here is to skip the item that's on the agenda today of continuing the inventory, to skip that item on December 11 and the meeting, the 7th meeting. That leaves us and I think I'm hearing that meeting number 9, we're not going to be applying the criteria. That's the committee's sense. But there's still a lot in here. It was my attempt to put down issues that we should address and should try to come up with recommendations to the council for. So shall we resume looking at this plan, or is there a different plan that somebody would like to talk about?
Okay, just to recap, if I may, just to make sure I understand it, that your plan, the meetings 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 would be eliminated, and then we would start with meeting number 10, talking about what your proposed recommendations for topics would be after that.
Not quite, Dennis. If you look at meeting number 5, the last item is discuss plan. It's discuss this plan, but it can be this plan as modified however we like.
Well, on the agenda for today is to consider proposed committee plan for issues to address.
Right.
I think that we're already doing that now.
Right.
If I'm correct, and we can start with the substance of the meetings that you had from after 9.
How about, may I suggest that after meeting 9, you want to pick up? What about?
Well, 9, 8, and 9 talk about the survey, the obstructions in the right-of-way, and I think we have our motion pushes all that to the city now.
I don't think so. A couple of things. First of all, meeting number 7, there's Cape Henlopen Drive. That's separate from the inventory of obstructions. I think there must be a different purpose to the charge specifically asks us to examine parking on Cape Henlopen Drive. So that's not part of the inventory, but that's an item we've been asked to address.
I think, isn't that one that Jeremy Deal is supposed to do as part of the inventory?
I proposed to assign it to him, but it's something the committee's supposed to do. I haven't even asked Jeremy if he's interested or willing to do that, because I don't even know really quite what the intent of the charge was on that point, and I've emailed Ted. I don't think I've heard back for clarification. But I think that remains part of our charge. Then meeting number 8, decide criteria. As I just talked about in regard to Khalil's concerns, and as I think I heard Kevin say, we want to decide policy. We don't want to say to the city staff, hey, go out and remove whatever you want to remove. It's to decide what the criteria are is policy. And then we would skip the item in meeting number 9, apply the criteria in Kevin's thinking.
I personally don't think that I want to be a part of saying exactly what that criteria is. To me, this is within the realm of the city and not us. And I don't want to be the one to say, particularly, on Oregon Avenue where I live, you can look at all the obstructions in the right-of-way you want, but if you don't understand the fact that the people that live on the west side of Oregon Avenue enter their home, they have parking behind their homes that they access from the alley. So as a practical matter, all of the parking on Oregon Avenue on the west side is the public. And if you don't know these nuances, I don't want to set an objective criteria personally. I don't want to go there. And I think I would have included that in what Kevin's motion addressed. If we're not going to be doing the surveys, why would we do the criteria?
Well, let me see if I can't explain. if we don't do the criteria, then we're basically saying we're not going to remove any obstructions.
No, I don't agree with that, Rob. And I want to interrupt you. It's not saying that we won't. It's saying we're kicking the ball back to the city for them to apply the policy that they have already instituted, which would involve those things.
We are the city, Dennis.
We
This
are a
committee-
committee. We are not the city.
It seems to me that this committee was formed by the city council in order to address the questions of, among others, how to recover parts of the right of way. If we're going to say, it's too hard for us, we can't even figure out what the policy ought to be. A streets department, do your worst. That's not a very good approach.
We have.
Rob, could I jump in for a moment?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Go ahead.
First of all, I don't want to get rid of meeting number 8 because it includes not only the criteria, but the permit issue. And I'd like to have the permit issue discussed. So I think to the point I thought you were trying to make, we would be changing the agenda, obviously, for proposed agenda for meeting number 5, meeting number 6, meeting number 7, except for the Cape Henlopen Drive. That issue has to be addressed. I don't want to get rid of meeting number 8 because I'd like to make sure the permit is discussed. I also think that with regard to the criteria, Dennis, the criteria could in fact, upon reflection, be simply a restatement of what the city has already come to a conclusion on. In other words, it's prospective. It uses the words practicable. It uses, you can address things of this sort. I don't want to prejudge what it would be yet, but I think having discussion about what that policy ought to be is totally within the realm of our charge. It doesn't mean by talking about the policy, though, you can write the policy to make sure that it covers and addresses the very concerns and issues you are raising by taking in the totality of the experience here. So I don't think we necessarily have to get rid of that. As a matter of fact, I would like to make sure that there are some protections for property owners in the exercise of what may happen in this area, to Rob's point. So I hope we keep that topic on the agenda, in the proposed agenda.
Where we go, I'm okay with that.
Okay.
But I don't want to get into specific items.
Nor, I think I've bored everybody on this call with the fact that nor do I.
All right, so I think I'm going to keep on scrolling down the meetings. And part of this discussion is prioritizing. This was my stab at it. And you'll see that I threw a lot of stuff, which I think is easy stuff, into meeting number 12. It's kind of yes or no stuff. But if some of those items in number 12 need more discussion, we can move them up. Everything's going to get moved up at this point. So let's look at the, I don't know if other people have thoughts about the order in which we ought to be tackling these things. And if there are other things we ought to be tackling and other things we ought not to be tackling.
Rob, I have a comment on that. With regards to meeting number 12, the first suggestion recommended city survey right-of-ways on Canal side of Cedar, I think is very, very important. One of the things that I am hoping to do on this committee was identify legal parking spots where people, whether you're residents, guests, or visitors, may park. And my preference all along has been for a parking permit policy that they would do with a permit. So considering that nearly every street that I've seen on the Canal side has parking on both sides, which probably needs to be changed as well, because every street that has parking on both sides makes it almost impossible for cars to access or depart on the city side, Canal side streets. So there probably needs to be no parking signs stated on one side, for sure. So I think that area has not been surveyed, and there are a lot of potential parking spots there for homeowners, guests, and potentially visitors. So I do think that would need to be moved up and something that is fast tracked, because again, I'm hopeful we're going to get to some sort of recommendations on how to best address parking on Lewis Beach, and those areas will play a key role.
Okay, how does the rest of the committee feel? Any objection to Khalil's idea? So Khalil, you would move that up. How high? Would that be the next thing we talk about?
As we start discussing, well, for example, on meeting 8, the permit system, which is listed there. I mean, in discussing that, we would discuss the pros and cons of that, how it would potentially work, but where the parking spaces would be and potentially would be. And so I think we'd have to move it to that part, because there's a fair amount of parking, available parking on the city side streets of Lewis Beach, the Canal side. I guess we'll refer to it as the Canal side. And yeah.
So that would be right after a permit system, or right before, or what would you like to
I would say before.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts on the sequence? And the sequence kind of is priority in my view. Any other thoughts on the sequence in which we tackle these things?
Could we talk about meeting
When
number
you have meeting 12 there, the second one, recommend the city ask DelDOT to maintain 10-foot clear zone in the right of way on both sides of Cedar. Is that the line of sight issue, Rob, or is it more than that?
It's more than that.
What would it be?
Well, for instance, in one of the streets fairly far east, there's brush that hasn't been controlled, and beyond the brush, there's a chain link fence. If the brush were moved before the chain link fence, a number of parking spaces would be opened up.
So I don't think that DelDOT implements the clear zone or assumes authority on the clear zone anymore in municipalities. So they would probably tell us we need to do it.
All right, well then I guess it would be recommended that city ask DelDOT for permission. That's partly line of sight though, Dennis.
Yes.
Mr. Morgan?
That's got to be Kevin.
That's right. And I apologize, Anne Marie, for not confusing you yet. And I'll do my best, because I think I've gotten everybody else so far today. On meeting number 10, you talk about parking on former paper streets, now open space, and there's a lot of terminology, and I think a little clarification, at least for me, would help. I think I've also heard them as city lots and so on. But it would be, do we have a document, and Charles, this might be coming towards you, do we have a document that identifies where all of those are?
I think we've asked Anne Marie for that. Anne Marie, do we have any progress on that?
So we did several years ago, probably in 2018, we merged we abandoned a number of the paper streets and merged them into the larger property that the marsh is in, and zoned it as open space. And that does not preclude parking. So we do have the surveys that were done as part of the folding the former paper streets into the lots. What we don't have surveys for are any additional paper streets that we did not abandon, because there are some other paper streets that we didn't abandon because they access private property that is yet undeveloped.
Now, Dennis, help me with my memory. There are paper streets on Cape Henlopen Drive
Correct.
were not converted,
Yes.
but are there any on Cedar Street that were not abandoned? That were not
Yes.
converted?
Yes, there were 2 or 3. One, as Anne Marie said, was Laurel, which is actually at the other end of Oregon Avenue across Cedar. And there's a home back there. And so to access that property. There's also another street that the fire department uses to deal with the Phragmites, to take their vehicles back there. There was another street up near the inlet where the city had made a commitment that Claymont, I believe it was, that the city would not change that into anything else. And that was a letter written by the city manager, which I saw a copy of. And the streets on Cape Henlopen Drive, 2 or 3 of them access private property. The first one, Alaska, accesses property. The second one, Maryland, accesses property. The third one is Virginia, which also accesses property. And the other reason that we didn't convert them is that those streets flood from the canal side. And we did a delineation of the wetlands there, and the city made a decision that we would not convert those paper streets to anything other than what they are.
And that doesn't, even when they access private property, if there's room for parking, that doesn't preclude parking.
That's correct. Is that right, Anne Marie? Yeah, even on the paper streets that are open space on the beach, there's no prohibition to parking. But a number of years ago when Jim Ford was mayor and we had a meeting to talk about making them parking, it probably turned into a small revolution. And so the city dropped that particular thought.
Well, it may be that if people who live on Lewis Beach are faced with either trying to create more parking out of rights of way or trying to create more parking out of paper, I don't know. So that may be something to.
I think it goes back to some of what Kevin was addressing. What is our goal here? I don't know that our goal was to create parking. I think it was to just make sure that where people were encroaching in a right of way that prevented parking, more on a basis of intentional as opposed to history. And I don't, Sunday of Labor Day weekend, you couldn't find a parking place on Lewis Beach. Friends of mine drove around for over a half hour. Now, when I say Lewis Beach, I mean between Savannah Road and the inlet, and they couldn't find a parking place, so here to park. And just like in the city, or the town side, when you want to get downtown, if there's no places to park, you leave. And I don't know that that's any different than the situation here. I mean, we are one town. This is not a subdivision of the city.
We have people working hard on the downtown parking too. So I think we're getting a little bit deeper than we need to on paper streets, but clearly we have something to discuss.
Rob, the only reason I raised it is I just wanted to, before we have the discussion, it might be helpful for the committee to get some additional information from the city about what we're talking about. Good. About which streets we're talking about or what are the right areas and so on. That's what I was trying to get. Good. In other words, could we create a list of possible opportunities to discuss?
Anne Marie, is that feasible?
So I was thinking maybe either with Charlie's assistance or with Janelle's assistance, we could create a map of sorts to do that. Great. Charlie, what are your thoughts? I think the problem with lists is they're not spatial, and I think people respond better to visuals.
Anne-Marie, we have a citywide street map.
Okay.
I just need to double check to make sure all those paper streets are on there. I believe that they are, but let me look, and if that's the case, you know, that's just a PDF that can be shared with the committee easy.
Okay.
They are on there, Charlie, and if you can't find it, I believe I still have a copy because I had a big copy when we did all these streets several years ago.
Okay.
Excuse me. Are the measurements of the paper streets on the plan, or is it just an indentation
Yeah,
that shows it's a paper street?
it's just a schematic plan pretty much with the marking on there.
Okay, so we would have no idea as far as how wide or how deep it goes, or if it could even accept cars in that area.
You can get a general idea from tax maps, which we've tried to do also in some of the studies we did on the paper streets that Dennis and Anne Marie are aware of, and I think Tim and Rob are now too. But the true width and length of those is to do the actual survey.
Okay.
Which we have not done yet. For the paper streets on the Canal side of Cedar Avenue or Cape Henlopen Drive, for that matter.
Okay, thank you.
Charlie, do you think it is important to survey the paper streets for purposes of determining whether or not we recommend they be parked on? It seems to me that we don't, that's more information than this committee needs for this purpose.
I think you're probably right, Rob, in that the studies that we did previously on the paper streets, they were actually used in advance, I think, Dennis, of the meeting you were talking about that turned into a revolution, because we used those studies to say whether any one of those paper streets could be used for parking purposes. So I think we did identify them just from our qualitative study, let's call it, which had a lot of detail. So I think, you know, you can definitely reach a conclusion of whether one of those paper streets is one that could be used for parking purposes or not, just from what we have now.
Great. And
I would agree. We don't need a survey there.
Great. All right, well, scrolling on down, we've touched on Cape Henlopen Drive. Don't really know what the goal of the charge is, but we'll find out. I think if we're not going to talk about applying the criteria in meeting 9, we might also cross out how we mark recovered parking spaces. That is not so much policy as how the city will do it if they do it. Is there any disagreement with the idea of dropping the item how mark any recovered parking spaces?
Is that Rob?
9. It's at the top of page 2, but it's under meeting number 9.
Okay, yeah, you're going to omit that?
I was going to suggest that.
I would agree.
Okay. So we've talked about.
Rob, could we add one in place of that? Could we include at some point a discussion about signage?
I think that's
under number 12.
Is that?
You want to move that one up?
Well, I just want to make sure we have enough time, because I think that's very confusing and may take some time.
Okay.
It's not uniform at all, and I don't know the reasoning behind why some signs were placed where they were and why they weren't. So I think it might help, again, which I think is so, by you identifying what is going to be the topic of the next meeting, everybody involved, including the city as necessary, can help us prepare to have an intelligent discussion.
And what on signage, Kevin, what would you like to see to help the discussion?
I believe, and part of our charge was to have a uniformity so that on emergency access streets and additional streets as well, so that it's understandable why there's no parking on one side versus the other. On some streets, it's no parking on both sides. In some streets, it's partial no parking. I didn't know, I thought we understood why those signs are where they are, and whether there should be additional uniformity so there's some sort of consistency throughout the Lewis Beach area.
Okay, I think when we get to that, Dennis can help address that because he's been involved in those decisions. But I think isn't there also the question of the signage being, the sign saying the same thing is phrased in a different way?
Yes.
Or the sign in the wrong place, or and content as well as.
I think there's also some signage that was installed that wasn't done by the city.
Yes, I've seen some of that.
One of the things to keep in mind, Kevin,
in a
as we
meeting.
talk
Can you close the
about
door?
the
Thanks.
emergency access streets, there is, as you go up, there's 7 emergency access streets, and when you go them, when you get to Bay Avenue, there's no parking on either side for 50 feet before you get to Bay Avenue. And that on both sides, there's no parking within 50 feet on the emergency access streets to Bay Avenue.
Thank you.
And that's some of the confusion on the signs. They don't all say the same thing, as Rob alluded to.
So what information would we need beyond just the idea that we want them to say the same thing? Can we handle that question?
Oh, it's also, and I think maybe this is something that I can have the streets guys help work on. It's determining which streets have signs and what the language is on each one, but also what the code says, because in some cases we've got no parking on this side, but the code doesn't say it. In other cases, the code does say it and there isn't a sign. So I thought that we tried to get a lot of that squared away a few years ago, but I'm guessing we didn't, or maybe people put up other signs.
The one we did no parking, you got them straight, Anne Marie. You did them well. You did all the ones that we did. You addressed and put it in the ordinance.
Okay.
Now, other people have put up other signs. Now that's one I'm not aware of. But you did a good job.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
About people putting up other signs. You're not talking about people putting up a sign on a whole street.
Just in front of their houses.
Yeah, well, some of the signs up there, to me, some people don't have identified driveways, and the public parks in front of their house and they can't access them. And we need to encourage people where there's a driveway to certainly identify it so that people don't park there. That was an issue we ran into before.
Yeah, I think I've heard you mention that. Okay, so signage, and there are a few sub-questions under it.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. Anything else that somebody thinks should be moved up or down?
One other issue, 2 other issues, Rob. First of all, under meeting number 11, you have alley clearance.
Yes.
What are you envisioning?
The thought there is, and I'm actually, Tim, you expressed it more eloquently than I did. So would you like to talk to that, or should I?
Why don't you start it and I'll supplement?
Okay. Some of the alleys are clear and well used, and they provide access to the rears of the houses. That has a couple of benefits. The house gets more parking, and also the trash platforms that are blocking rights of ways in some cases and are unsightly in all cases are on the street rather than behind the house. The alley, part of the purpose of the alley is so that the streets department can go down and load up the recycling and the trash without blocking traffic, without endangering pedestrians, and without problems for themselves. So the thought is that, and I've also heard a homeowner say, clear my alley, for that very reason. So there's at least some desire by people who back onto the alleys to make them usable. I think that's all the thinking I can remember. Tim, was there more?
No, that that's a good representation of what could, yes, that's fine.
So that's what we would discuss under that rubric, Kevin.
Okay, that makes total sense, but I know that on some streets, the alley behind the street has disappeared over time.
Yeah.
And, you know, buildings have gone in there and properties have been extended and fences and what have you. So we're not talking about that per se. We're talking about the very identifiable alleys where we want to make sure that those are clear for people to go up and down.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes. It's not to say that if an alley isn't identifiable, but it doesn't have the problems you cite, that we couldn't clear it the first time maybe in a long time. But obviously, if there's a house in there, that's the question. So any other questions or suggestions on the plan?
Rob, under number 12,
Yes.
your third recommendation relates to the city dealing with the cluster mailboxes, and we've already done that, and Anne Marie's agreed to that. We did that at an earlier meeting, so we could remove that one. That's already done.
Now, I know that we asked Anne Marie to talk with USPS,
Mhm.
but
Okay.
it wasn't clear to me that gives enough guidance on whose mailboxes to cluster where.
Right.
Or Anne Marie, are you clear enough?
I thought I was bringing information back. So, I mean, but if there's agreement that we should do it, I mean, I could just do it, but I think that it would probably be a recommendation to council.
As an anecdotal, on Vermont, on the east side of Vermont, there is a cluster of 4 mailboxes at the corner of Vermont and Cedar.
Yeah, I saw those.
When I saw that, I laughed.
Yeah.
But, so there is precedent for it.
Right, and I think
It didn't cover all the mailboxes on the entire street, just 4 of them.
right. But I'm a little bit reluctant to close on a recommendation in this meeting because we want
Okay.
it on an agenda for purposes of notice in case somebody has a particularly beautiful mailbox they want.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The 6th recommendation
Yes,
dealing with the white line on Savannah.
yes,
I know I had mentioned that to you, and I was under the impression that the travel lane on Savannah Road there was 11 feet wide,
right,
and it is not. I went up and measured it. It's only 10. And the distance between the curb and the white line is only 4 feet. And I think that's something that the city needs to, and we could make a recommendation the city address that, because it's my understanding that the police give tickets for cars that are parked there, where the car crosses the white line goes into the travel lane. So I think that's.
in what respect?
And we could leave it on and make a recommendation.
Okay, maybe when we get there, you can explain that in greater detail, just what recommendation you think we ought to ask the city to take up. All right.
Rob, I apologize. One more.
No, don't apologize. That's what we're.
You had listed under not within charge, and that has to do with, if we're trying to accommodate people, we're trying to address.
Somebody, I got a lot of background noise for somebody. Could you go on mute? Thanks. Go ahead, Kevin.
I was hoping that we could not rule summarily out the whole issue of encouraging bike use on Lewis Beach. So you've had this listed down only because the more people who use bikes, the more parking spaces that's going to open up. So I hope we could have a discussion about bike racks or even bicycle lanes. We at least have an opportunity to have.
We didn't get the muting we asked for, but what is the feeling of the rest of the committee? I know, to have the within charge? This is not working.
Where that's coming from?
Somebody muted. All right. So Kevin, it's probably you because you needed to be unmuted to make the point. Would you like to see that moved up to within charge, but not time, or do you want to move it all the way up to consider?
I would like to move it up to consider.
And what's the feeling of the others?
Fine with me.
I support that.
Yes.
Okay. Do you want to opine on how far you want to move it up, Kevin?
You're muted, Kev.
I'm very nervous at this point about what I'm picking up on my system because everything has been turned off and there's no one else in the house, so it's a little weird. The
dog.
We must have. Oh well, no, the dog's had already driven out. She got tired of it. She left.
It's usually your dogs.
I would like Rob to leave a little discretion as we kind of redo and reconsider what's happened today.
Okay.
To making these arrangements. I feel a little awkward about saying, oh, it should be meeting number 7 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to make sure totality of what we're doing, we can work out a logical sequence.
Okay.
So I'd
like to ask a question, please.
I'm trying to give some discretion to the chair. I'm sorry.
I'd like to ask Kevin. Kevin, are you asking? Is the discussion about bike lanes? Are you moving that issue up? Is that it?
I would like to have if we are given what our charge is, I'd like to at least have an opportunity to have a discussion about, yes, bike lanes.
I was just going to ask, could we also tag along the infrastructure called bike racks as well? If we're going to talk about bike lanes, make sure that we have a way to accommodate the bikes.
I think I had said bike lanes and bike racks. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Let me throw in one thing. I mean, if you're talking about bike lanes on Cedar Street, if you create a bike lane on both sides, wherever you create a bike lane, you cannot park a car at any time. Before, and because it would eliminate so many parking places on Cedar Street, we have never pursued putting parking lanes on Cedar Street.
What about changing the bike lanes and bike racks item to encouraging bicycling on Lewis Beach? Would that be an appropriate item?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We may want to reach out to Don Long and ask him to have the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee discuss what they see as the impediments to safe cycling or encouraging cycling in that area. I'm sure RACS is part of it, but.
Yeah, and remember that you can bicycle both directions on Bay Avenue now, so there's not as much a need to have a bicycle on Cedar. You can eliminate that. You can avoid that if you would like to.
But there's also the fact that a biker has the right to use the traffic lanes on Cedar for the bike riding.
Absolutely.
So, you know, we don't have to have a separate lane just for biking.
We're getting to the meat of the item. That sounds like a fairly substantial reshuffle of our plan, but something we can work with. Let me now point out that if we are so lucky as to dispose of an issue in time, we may want to have a backup issue that we don't expect to get to, but on the agenda for that day so that we can.
Okay.
Without listing them all, I might be a little bit ambitious on each meeting's agenda so that we don't find ourselves with nothing to talk about on a particular day. All right. I think we've done a good day's work. So can we talk about the schedule for the next meeting after the 11th? I wouldn't mind having it any time in the week of the 14th. I don't know how the committee feels.
Well, you know, we're approaching the holidays here, so that's grabbing, you know, just a consideration.
Well, yeah, and it's even more of a consideration the next 2 weeks. So,
Can we keep the meeting on the 11th?
oh, we're keeping the 11th,
Right.
but then we're looking beyond that.
The week of the 14th is what you're asking for now, right, Rob?
It is. Now, it may be that if we do well on the 14th, we can skip the next 2 weeks and pick up in the first full week of January, but
I see.
you know, it depends. So let's look at the week of the 14th and see if we can agree on a day. How about
Anytime.
any time for you, Linda?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Pretty open.
The 15th, how does the 15th look?
Works for me.
Good for me.
It's good for me, but not in the morning. In the afternoon is much better.
Okay.
So what time are you talking about? We have a 3 o'clock Board of Health meeting on the 15th.
Then let's make it 5 o'clock.
Okay.
How about 1 o'clock?
Let's make it 1 o'clock. Anybody have a problem with 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock on the 15th.
That'll work.
All right, let's hope it works for Jeremy. But we'll just let him know about it. Good. I don't think we want to schedule further in advance than that. So
Okay.
the 15th at 1 o'clock. All right. Is there anything else before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Is there a motion to adjourn?
So move. We have a second?
Second.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Thank you very, very much, everyone.
Okay, Anne Marie, you close me out, will you? I don't know how to do it on here.
All right.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. Take care.
Bye-bye.